Well, Ronnie, no, Ronnie and Brenda, they had a funeral to go to for,
Oh, yeah, one of the Evans passed
Yeah.
away.
yeah, one of those people. I figure,
Is Cody still in town?
no, she used to do her doctor's appointments on
Oh, that's right.
Thursday, so she's still trying to get that worked out.
Even Jane might have forgot.
So, I don't know, he was here yesterday.
Huh?
I said he was here yesterday, so.
Well, Bible study?
No, cutting the grass. He's probably still worn out from cutting the grass. I don't know, maybe he showed up for Bible study yesterday, I don't know.
I know they had, he was telling Roger something they had, somebody coming back, the little house there remodeling.
Yeah.
But-
Well, let's go ahead and open up in a word of prayer, and I was going to mention. So I saw Kathy on Sunday afternoon. So her and Brian, I just continue to pray for her. She goes next week. She's supposed to start treatments, but they're going to double check some things. But when she starts the treatment, she'll go down one day and then come back. But she was in good spirits. She appreciated the cards and the gift so just continue to remember her.
Ruth, she's struggling.
Ruth is trying to get off some medicine, and she's having some issues. She's fallen several times, and so just continue to remember her. And
the doctors had her on the medicine that they told her she shouldn't have been on, but like maybe a couple months, and she's been on it for like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
yeah,
And some way they discovered it, and so bless her heart, she's had time.
yeah. But other than that, I think that's it. Unless anybody's got anything else.
And the kids going back.
The kids go back.
He was just talking about having a thing.
Teachers mostly.
Yeah.
That's what I've been cycle.
Well, they start back at the end of August. Some have already started back, but yeah, it's just so. I was in a class, teaching a class today, and I always tell the students, I'll call your name, but if you go by something else, just let me know. So, sometimes it's like middle name or,
Yeah.
it's the name is Ashley, but they will say, just call me Ash, or something like that. But, so I had this one, and it was a guy's name that I had on my roster, but they said I've preferred to be called Brandy, and I just started going by that name. And I mean, I said, I'll call you whatever, I may judge you silently, but I'm at least gonna, but I said, I'll call you whatever, but I mean, it's just I think I had two this semester that
Was he dressed like a girl or something?
that would not have been my first guess.
Okay.
So I stopped asking questions after a while.
Maybe he's just starting his trends.
I don't know. It's better than the cat I had in that class I was subbing in last year. That's all I gotta say. So
Emma said she's got one they call Creek. His name is something else, but the parents call
yeah,
her.
Jody said the kid kind of
Creek.
Creek.
Creek. They got one named,
I don't know where these parents come up with names.
that's what I told her. I said,
I worked in a hospital for 10 years.
Yeah.
Some of the names, I had one idiot call their child. Their last name was Juene, June. Kid's name was April May.
you're going,
We had a kid, and sometimes they make you do that like as a nickname, but they always teach them, what their real name is, because they have to be able to write that and stuff. We had a kid when we were both very first at Oxford, whose legal name on birth certificate was Catfish, because that's that area.
Yeah, that's the area there.
And I mean, it's amazing what people come up with. And so
It's sort of.
yeah, there's some. I don't have any weird names. I just I'll tell you this. I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you the story when we get started Bible study. I have a kid in one of my classes this semester. It's spelled Y-A-E-L. Well, it's actually pronounced J-L. It comes from the Bible. It's from the book of Judges. And so, sometimes like that, I know I'm going to say it wrong. And so he said, it's J-L. He said, it's a Hebrew name. And I recognized that. I said, well, Shalom, figuring they're Jewish. No, he said, I'm not Jewish. They just gave me that name.
Oh, my Lord.
So, well, whatever.
Jenny said they had one named Knight, too. Like
Yeah.
N-I-G-H-T.
No, I think it's
K-N-I.
K-I-G-H-T.
They call him Knight,
Yeah.
and Sir. One that's called Sir.
Legal name, sir.
Yeah, that's his legal name, Sir.
Oh, Lord.
I know. Well, let's open up in a word of prayer, and we'll get started with the rest of chapter 3 today. Lord Father, I just want to thank you for this time, and Lord, that you would watch over us. I know there's a lot going on around us and in our community, but Lord, would you just keep us in your watch and help us to see you. And Lord, as people come against, we know that you're always in control. We thank you for this time. In your name we pray. Amen. We're in the rest of chapter 3, verse 8. And we saw that Haman last week came on the scene. And I may have said it, I want to say it again. Haman basically comes up with this idea that he's going to get rid of all the Jews. He's going to exterminate all the Jews. He's a descendant of Esau. And so there's been that animosity for well over 1,000 years or more. But he basically comes up with this plan because he learns that Mordecai is a Jew, and he won't bow down to him. So he's going to get back at Mordecai by killing everybody. I mean, that's basically the idea. And, we can read the story. We know the story because God is always in control, and we can have a confidence in that. But you can imagine that the average Jewish person living in Persia at this time was not so confident. No doubt they were filled with unimaginable horror at what they perceived as the eventual death at the hand of evil men. We too know that God is always sovereign. And we know that we're secure, but those struggles are real. And so I want us to see some things today from the rest of chapter 3. So I'm going to start in verse 8. Then Haman said to the king, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all the other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of the Agagite, and the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also. Do with them as you please. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written, just as Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, and each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of the king. and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy and kill and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the people so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel at Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. So I want to let's look at his plot first, verse 8 through 11. He comes up with this plot to be fulfilled, and look at his agenda in verse 8. Then Haman said to the king, there are certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples and the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. It's interesting when we read that. I want to write out beside, liar, liar, your pants are on fire. Most likely because there's nothing we've learned that the Jewish people at this point were disobeying the king's laws. Most of them probably, if we go by other accounts, probably just went along with everything. They fit in with culture. They stood out in no way whatsoever. As far as we know, the only person that's disobeyed the king's law up until this point is Mordecai. And that's just because he's not bowing down to Haman. And so Haman, basically, I don't want to say Haman is lying, but he's not telling the full truth. Haman felt as if the king could no longer tolerate the Jews. And the king is probably like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but sure, that sounds like a good idea. Not that the king was just out there in no man's land, but he probably said, well, hey, they're not obeying. I don't know who you're talking about, but yeah, we got to get rid of those people. But Haman's out there basically telling a non-truth in order to do it. Satan has sought to hinder and destroy the people of God ever since creation. Throughout the Bible, we've seen Satan's hand being raised against those who sought to serve the Lord. Satan even tried to kill Jesus as a baby. And Satan continues to work today to destroy those who would stand up with God. Look at verse 9. So Haman appeals to the king. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. You want a way to somebody, you're going to offer them money. Hey, king, if you'll do this, I'll pay you 10,000 talents of silver of his own money to eliminate that. I don't have a reference of exactly how much that might be in today's, but it's a lot of money. And basically he's saying, I'm going to pay you all this money if you'll send out the people to destroy these people. I mean, he's basically paying for people to be killed. And we know those who seek to prevent the plans and the purposes of God seldom act alone. Haman knew he was going to need support of the king, and Satan seeks to unite humanity against the church in order to strive his promises. Satan wants the world to believe that they would be in a better position if the church ceased to exist. And little do they know that their efforts are going to be futile. We may endure persecution, physical affliction, but the church will never face destruction. Look at verse 10. Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So the king would use his ring. That was his symbol. If you had the ring, basically it was like you were working for you were the king. And this gave the support. Now, if you've read the book of Esther, we know that the king had no idea of the implications this was going to cause for Esther. He has no idea. I love Proverbs 18:13. It says this: he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. He didn't even investigate. He didn't say, hey, who are these people? What laws have they broken? How have they been disobedient? There wasn't anything like that. And I think our world continues to be influenced by those who promote Satan's agenda. I was listening to something. Oh, I know who I was listening to. And I disagree with him on a lot of things, but sometimes he kind of is spot on. If you've ever heard of a guy named Bill Maher, he's a kind of a political guy. He's total opposite ends, but he's what I agree with him on is he calls out the ludicrousy of how far things have gone. And he was talking about, these people that call for, a new movement and having to be accepted and all this stuff. And he said, if you look at throughout history of things like communism and China, all these things, it's never worked out well for people. And it's so true that people are pushed that you have to accept something, but unwilling to accept other things. So you have to accept me because of this is what I am, but I am not willing to accept anything else. See, there's that disconnect there. And ignorance will be no excuse when people stand before the Lord in judgment. Look at verse 11. The king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also, do with them as you please. I mean, basically, the king said to Haman, hey, just take the money. I'm not really interested. Just do what you want to do. Haman had to be successful in his campaign to persuade the king, and now he had all the authority he wanted. And I'm actually struck by the irony here. And it's kind of one of those things. I've read Esther before. I've studied Esther before. And it's kind of one of those things I say it all the time. Never hit me before. But I was struck by the irony. Here, the king and Haman felt as if they had devised a plan that could not fail to promote their agenda. They're like, yes, we got this going. The money was available. He had the backing of the king, but they failed to figure one major factor into that equation. You know what that is? God. They didn't, hey, we got money, we got the people, let's round them up. We got a year to get this done. And on this day, everybody's gonna be exterminated. It's a foolproof plan, except for the God equation. All the planning and resources Persia possessed would never thwart the divine plan of God. Sometimes, if you're like me, sometimes it feels like, yes, we are outnumbered, so to say. Most governments, forsaking God, no longer sympathetic to churches, billions of dollars and liberal agendas, moving farther and farther away from God. But God is greater in us than he that is in the world. If God be for us, what? Who can be against us? And it's never hit me that verse before that they had in those verses, they had the perfect plan. Okay, we've got money, we've got men, we've got a date set, we've got the king's blessing, everything is good, except we forgot to factor in God. I've been trying to finish up a course on the book of Daniel, and I know we've done a study in the book of Daniel before, but there was something that came across. You just thinking about, I was on when Daniel goes to, when he's told that he can't pray, right? And it's kind of the same thing. You know, nobody can pray except to the king, right? They did to catch Daniel so that they could get rid of him. They came up with this perfect plan. Hey, let's come up with this thing where Daniel can't pray, and we'll catch him, and then the king will get rid of him, and we'll be back in power, and everything will be good. But they forgot one thing in the equation. They forgot God. I was working on something. It was actually about the lions at that time. We talk about the lion's den, and how God. We read about God closed their mouth and stuff like that. But lions were, which they rightly should be, were feared. But they would gather the lions and they would keep them, some sense like almost like a zoo. But that's what they would use to execute people. That's what those things were used for. And they had this perfect plan to try to get rid of Daniel, except you forgot the God equation. And it's very similar here. And it's kind of like, again, one of those things like, I never thought about it that way before. Look at verses 12 through 15. Look at the plan. So they're gathered together. In verse 12, it says, the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded to the king's satraps and to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring. This was a big process. They gathered. Remember, the Persian Empire goes from modern day India to modern day Saudi Arabia. So hundreds of millions of people scattered, different languages, different things, and they've got people in there. I kind of imagine one big room, and they're going, okay, now, who's writing in the Indian language, and who's writing in okay, now if you guys, you guys got to finish writing this, and they got people writing to in every language, right? Sending it, getting ready to send it out. The attack on the Jews in Persia would not be limited just to those around Susa, but all over. And we don't know how far, people went from, like over to India or over towards Saudi. We don't know how far, but they're not taking any chances. Sin and depravity are never isolated and confined to a specific region. I've said this before, it makes my skin crawl when I hear people say it. What I do does not affect anybody else. I think that is the dumbest thing anybody, and typically people who say that, they're not the brightest people in the world. While some areas face more intense persecution probably than others, they were getting ready to go throughout the kingdom to carry this out. Satan's plan to hinder the church and his global plan is still going to be in effect. The church is still always going to be there. Look at verse 13. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to seize the possessions for plunder. One day. He did not seek to remove only those Jews who hindered his agenda, but all the Jews, regardless of who they were. And then they were going to be, hey, if you kill these people, you get what they have. So basically, you're creating this mentality of, hey, if they're Jewish, kill them, and you get all their stuff. Haman had no mercy on any of them. Sadly, such hatred and animosity was not just limited to Haman. And I've made this comparison before, and there's no way not to compare it, but to the genocide of the Germans in World War II. It didn't matter. Israel remains a target of radical Islam even today. And if you look at the nation of Israel and all the countries that surround it, they're basically surrounded by all countries who hate them. We cannot relate to the brutality of that. But God has always preserved the Jewish people. And like Haman, Satan seeks to destroy those who are following God today. Look at verse 14. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province and was published to all people so that they should be ready for this day. Now, I read that, and again, it comes to mind. How do you get ready for that day? Y'all remember at the end of 1999, we're getting ready to go into year 2000. And it was called the year of what? Y2K. All computers are going to crash, right? Because they could not flip over to the year 2000. I remember working for the technology department of Catawba County Schools. And we physically, several times, went around to every single computer in the public schools, the Catawba County Public Schools, with updates to make sure that they were going to flip over. I mean, do y'all remember that? Like that night, we're like, everything is going to go black at midnight because, ancient technology. People were, stockpiling and getting prepared. How do you prepare? And I read that verse and I go, how do you prepare? Honey, mark that day on the calendar because that's the day we're going to get killed. I mean, how do you, prepare for that, right? I mean, I can think of other days when you go, okay, I got to get ready for this. I got to get, not Emma mainly, but, getting ready for tomorrow or, the day where you get married and you start getting ready. And, I'm thinking, it's one of those verses I read and go, how do you get ready for that? But verse 14, each province was ordered to begin making preparation to exterminate the Jews when the appropriate time arrived. Satan never rests. He seeks to deceive, hinder, destroy all he can. I'm reminded, the only thing I could think of was Ephesians 6:13. Take up the full armor of God so that you'll be able to resist the devil and having done everything to stand firm. verse 15. The couriers went out, impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued at the citadel of Susa. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. We live in a 24-hour-a-day news thing, right? I mean, it's just all the time. News. Here's what I imagine. And sometimes I love the way my mind, just the images. All right. I imagine all these people in their chariots and their horses. It's like mass exodus from Susa going out, just like UPS trucks just filing out of the capital of Susa, going everywhere. The king and Haman going, hey, you want something to drink? Sure, no problem. You want to, let's get something to eat. You know, we just decided to annihilate a lot of people. Let's sit down and, you know, just have a good time. You know, sit by the pool, have a relax. The rest of the city is like, they're going to kill all these people. I mean, like, there's no warning. You know, news. King has decided 1 year from today to kill all the Jews. What? You know, king relaxing by a pool while he kills the Jews. You know, I mean, it's just, that's what I imagine going on in this. You know, even in the Medo-Persian Empire, the barbaric culture, this would have been an utter shock to the people. I mean, just outrageous. You know, I am reminded, though, that we have to continue to be the voice of truth and right. Being free from the bondage of sin is our only hope. And I cannot imagine walking one day to such news as the Jews in Persia did when they got this. I mean, I just don't know. Imagine today that we receive news that 1 year from today, all of these people were going to be executed. The only other thing that comes to mind, and some of you may remember this. Remember during the Vietnam War, at one point they were doing the draft and they had it televised where they were drawing the birth dates, right? The big drum, and if your birth date was April 22nd, if you were born on April 22nd, you were the first to be drafted. And y'all remember that? And people watching that and being relieved that they weren't the first ones, hoping that they were far enough down on the list. And then, knowing that you were going to be called up. But I mean, I still can't imagine going, we've got 365 days before they're going to kill us.
Almost like the decree on abortion.
Yeah. We've got 364 days left. We've got 192 days. It's unbelievable. But we have to know that the hope is still in Jesus. And if we're in the midst of turmoil, there's still Jesus. It took almost 50 years to overturn Roe versus Wade. 50 years. I was born in April of 1973. So that would have been February, March, April. 3 months. I can count. Really, I can. 3 months after the Supreme Court ruled that abortion was legal. And it took almost 50 years to get to the point. And it's, we still have a long way to go to protecting that. And we're getting closer, I think. And I'm thankful that we have people that are willing to stand up. Our side note, not really related to abortion, but our state legislator just recently overrode the governor's veto on 3 things. One, that could not affirm LGBT, all the other letters in school, and that if kids began to want to be called by a different pronoun, that the schools had to notify the parents. No longer allow for transgender affirming health care. So you had to be that. And you had to play sports with the biology that you were born with. So men cannot play women's sports. Sadly, I'm doing a little bit with this little Christian school over here in Hickory. It's real small. But sadly, they just last year had to change their dress code policy that you had to wear clothes that went along with the sex assigned, the sex that you were born with, your biological. So that I didn't mean to say the word assigned because that sounds like we get a choice. But, it's just sad that even in Christian places that you have to do that. But we know that God's always in control. So what comments or questions do you have today?
I thought about thinking, it says when King and Hannah sat down and prayed. It appears, they had no hope in God. I mean, they weren't.
Yeah,
They had no salvation. And, maybe they thought, well, let's just get drunk and we can just wipe all this out. Like a lot of people do today.
Yeah.
Something happens and,
Yeah.
they're getting ready to do something they know they shouldn't do, and they think, well, let's just get drunk and we won't have to think about it.
Well, we know from chapter 1 of Esther that the king did not have any problem drinking. I mean, he threw a party for a year and 6 months. So, but it kind of like, it's like, it was almost, I read it almost like a casual thing. Like,
We'll just get drunk.
Yeah.
It's just an escape.
Yeah. And if you study the Holocaust and even like some of the internment, that's what it was like for the Germans. It was just a casual thing.
Yeah.
I don't like you. And I use the reference, but there's a scene in the Schindler's List movie where they're building this camp. They're using the Jews to build this camp, and this lady says to the leader of the camp, the building's going to fall if we don't redo this. And he gets mad and he shoots her, and then turns around and says, now do what she was saying to do, rebuild it. But they just do it casually. That's the same mentality. So, but God's always in control. Well, let's pray and look forward to seeing everybody on Sunday. Lord and Father, I just want to thank you for this time. And Lord, I ask you to just guide us and direct us. We know that you are always in control, and you are always ready to step in.